So with the permission of all chairpersons, I think, should we proceed now? Other chairpersons?
No, we can start.
please opine. Yeah.
We can start. We can start.
Please start, sir.
Okay. Dr.
Thank you.
Atul Gujrati, your time starts now.
Okay, sir.
You can share your screen.
Yes, sir. So am I audible and my slides are visible?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
So good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to present a study on large-scale diabetic systematic strategy for diabetic retinopathy screening in a tertiary eye care center. Diabetes mellitus is an epidemic and a major public healthcare
I think the audio is getting
concern globally, and diabetic retinopathy is a potentially blinding but preventive. Diabetic retinopathy affects working age population and is asymptomatic till late stages. Hence, early detection of the disease is required. Reason for screening is high prevalence of undiagnosed diabetes in general population, limited attention in the government programs and infrastructure, lack of awareness about the disease and its complication among people, overall less healthcare seeking behavior of the people. So, to screen large number of population, our strategy includes community outreach and hospital-based methods. Community outreach includes diabetes and diabetic retinopathy screening and awareness camps, World Diabetes Day camps, comprehensive cataract and refractive screening camps. Hospital-based method includes telemedicine and direct referrals from diabetes. Diabetes and diabetic retinopathy screening and awareness camps are conducted in collaboration with NGOs where place and
I think your audio is going
managed by
in.
NGOs. Here, one team containing one retina specialist, trained healthcare workers, counselors, volunteers from NGOs will go to a remote place and conduct diabetic retinopathy screening camp. Here, referable diabetic retinopathy is to diabetic retinopathy that is moderate NPDR or above with or without diabetic macular edema. Sight-threatening diabetes retinopathy includes proliferative diabetic retinopathy or diabetic macular edema. Here, first patient comes to registration counter where all general information and relevant medical history is entered. Then random blood sugar sampling is done in every patient. In all diabetic patient, retail fundus examination is done. Also, in the patient who are non-diabetic but having RBS values more than 140 mg/% or age more than 40 years, retail fundus examination is done. These are the sample forms which has to be filled for every patient. In this section, all the general information and diabetic history is entered. Any gross abnormality in the entry segment, if present, is entered. All the signs of diabetic retinopathy are marked in this section, and after that, diabetic retinopathy is classified, and it is determined whether that patient is referable or non-referable. Referable patients are referred to main hospital where these patients are given priority. Non-referable patients are given information about diet, complication, and importance of compliance to treatment and regular checkup. On Diabetes Day camps, on the 14th November is considered as a World Diabetes Day. It gives us opportunity to increase the awareness about the diabetes and diabetic retinopathy. Diabetic and diabetic retinopathy. Oh.
Yeah, you can continue and share your screen again. Screen sharing is gone. Or the person has gone out of the Zoom network. Technical team, what has happened? Hello, Mr. Ajay. I think when you have started the recording, the person who was presenting is out of the hall.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. What has happened? One more thing, till the person joins, are you able to put the timer when the presenter is presenting?
How much time, sir?
Timer.
Yes, sir.
So that the person and even the judges, they know that how much
Yes, sir.
time
Timer is here.
Yeah. It should be playing along with the presenters, this thing. And now the presenter is gone out. What has happened? Atul Gujrati is not seen. That's Gujarati doctor is not seen. Atul Gujrati.
I think net issue is there, sir.
If he is in waiting, just take him in.
He's logged again. Login again.
Okay.
I active.
And you put the timer on when the person starts, please. Huh? Without saying.
Which time? 8 minutes?
Good morning, sir. Sorry for the interruption, sir. Can I start?
Dr. Atul, how much timing is allotted to you people?
7 minutes, sir.
Okay.
Dear judges,
6
the
minutes, 6
presentation
minutes.
time is 6 minutes, maximum 6 minutes. With 2
Maximum
minutes,
6 minutes.
So you put the timer of 6 minutes only.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir. So, continuing, comprehensive cataract and refractive error screening camps. These camps are conducted in rural areas where healthcare facilities are sparse. These camps are focused mainly on cataract and refractive error. Still, patients who are having cataract or known case of diabetes mellitus, patients whose loss of vision is not correlating with cataract yet, these patients are subjected to RBS measurement and detailed fundus examination by ophthalmologist. If patient has referable diabetic retinopathy, these patients are referred. Coming to telemedicine, vision centers play a crucial role in telemedicine. Here, our hospital have 11 vision centers in rural areas. These vision centers are constantly involved in providing primary eye care to the patients in the rural areas. Here, slit lamp examination, applanation, tonometry, and refraction is done in every patient visiting vision center, whereas blood sugar level measurement, blood pressure measurement, and non-magnetic fundus photography is done in selective patients. These non-magnetic fundus photography is done in patients having RBS value more than 140 mg/% or patient is non-diabetic or the visual loss is not correlating with cataract. Here, fundus photography is taken. If it is a good quality fundus photograph, it is analyzed by ophthalmologist at main center and is determined whether it is referable or non-referable patient. Poor quality fundus photograph, patients are referred to main center. Direct referral from diabetologists and physicians. They have been referring these patients for diabetic retinopathy screening to our hospital. Coming to results, in the diabetic retinopathy screening camps, total 9,266 patients were screened. Out of it, 44% patient, that is 4,095 patients had diabetes. Out of that, 453 patients had newly diagnosed diabetes mellitus. Among all diabetic patients, total 392 patients had diabetic retinopathy, out of which 148 patients were referable diabetic retinopathy patients. Among all the patients who were referred to main hospital, 82% patients actually visited the hospital. So on World Diabetes Day camps, total 4,166 patients were screened, out of which 1,054 patients were diabetics and 123 patients were having diabetic retinopathy. In comprehensive cataract refractive error screening camps, total more than 80,000 patients were screened, out of which 900 patients had diabetes and 54 patients were diabetic retinopathy patients. Out of all these patients, only patients who were opted for cataract surgery could be screened for diabetes. Also, these camps are for refractive error correction, so significant number of patients were from young age group. Coming to some of the results, diabetic retinopathy screening camps could detect 44% patients as a diabetic patient, whereas diabetes day camps had 25% of diabetic patients. Still, in diabetic retinopathy screening camps, only 9.5% patient were diagnosed at having diabetic retinopathy, whereas diabetic screening camp had 11%, more than 11% patient as diabetic retinopathy. Cataract screening and telemedicine, this strategy could screen lot of a huge number of patients, but still a small amount of diabetes and diabetic retinopathy could be detected. Whereas referrals, direct referrals for diabetologists, where 100% patients were known case of diabetics, where 67% patients were having diabetic retinopathy. So in total, 1,80,000 and 81,732 patients were screened, out of which 9,524 patients were detected as diabetic patients, and 1,509 patients had diabetic retinopathy. So among all diabetic patients, 15.84% patients were having diabetic retinopathy. Coming to discussion, diabetic retinopathy screening camps has high diabetic retinopathy detection rate, along with outreach to the areas with poor healthcare infrastructure. Follow-up percentage was good, 82%. Diabetes day camps has had more OPD number of patients because increased awareness, and these camps were organized at more accessible places. Comprehensive screening camps were focused on cataract and refractive error. Hence, it dilutes the primary objective of diabetic retinopathy screening. Vision centers were restricted to specific geographic area and rural areas and limited to population, with limited population. Hence, less number of diabetic retinopathy patients could be detected. In above mentioned strategies, diabetic screening was not the primary focus of the service. Out of all patients referred by diabetology, 61% patient had diabetic retinopathy. This
Your
highlights.
time is up. Your time is up. Please sum up.
Okay, so conclusion, diabetic retinopathy screening camps is a most effective strategy in detecting diabetic retinopathy. Also, multimodal approach involving ophthalmologists, physician, and NGOs is required. And also, the local diabetologists, labs, and pharmacology and PSCs need to be involved in the screening process. Thank you. These are my references. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Gujrati. Any questions from the judges? Anyone from the judges? If you want to ask something. Please unmute yourself, Dr.
Okay.
Dhanik Chand. Yeah. You are not audible, Dr. Dhanik Chand.
Hello.
Yeah,
I'm
please.
audible, sir?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you use opportunistic diabetic retinopathy screening along with partnership with government hospitals, PHCs?
So, yes, sir. Few years back, there was a program where all the PHCs here in Tamil Nadu, PHCs will have one on every Wednesday. They'll distribute diabetes medication for free to the patient. So, a lot of diabetic patients used to come on Wednesday. So, a few years back, every Wednesday, our team of doctor healthcare professionals used to go to the PHC and screen patients for diabetic retinopathy. So, every PHC was allotted one separate day. And it will take around one cycle is to be like a 30-day cycle to repeat that test at specific PSC. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think Dr. Divya Agarwal should be ready. In between, I'll just conclude with one or two sentences for this presentation. Dr. Divya Agarwal, you have to be ready. I think IMA headquarters as well as AIOS has been doing this particular mission of diabetic retinopathy prevention in a very nice way at national level. Most of these states are also involved, and this is the mission of all the ophthalmologists, including diabetologists, physicians, and many more doctors across the country. Thank you so much. Now, Dr. Divya Agarwal can start. At the same moment, I request...
Sir, excuse me, sir. Sir, I have one connection issue. Can I present 5 minutes later?
Okay. Dr. Mihir Kothari, are you there? Dr. Rakesh Anjanappa, are you there? Well, Dr. Priyanka Sudhakar?
Sir, Dr. Rakesh is there. Dr. Rakesh Anjana.
Okay, sir. Okay, Dr. Rakesh, you can present. You can share the screen, Dr. Rakesh. The next person will be Dr. Divya. You should be ready till Dr. Rakesh
Yes, sir.
finishes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And technical team, just please put on the
Dr.
timer when the
Rakesh,
person starts.
Dr. Rakesh, please share your screen.
Okay, sir. Yeah.
Devansh, please help. Any issues? Heavy team Devansh, any issues?
I think net is not.
I think he has muted himself. The video is also gone.
Sir,
How is connecting?
probably-
I think net is gone, Dr. Rakesh. We should take next presentation. We should take a next presentation.
Okay, Dr. Divya Agrawal, are you ready now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Please share your screen, sir.
Share your screen and start, and the timer will also start. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Today I will be presenting my case on my free paper on myopia meta-analysis. Is my screen visible, sir?
Yes.
Thank you. So today I'll be presenting on my presentation on prevalence of myopia in Indian school children, a meta-analysis of last 4 decades. So why we have done this? Because in 2016 there was a manuscript by Brian Holden et al. Which said that myopia prevalence in world will increase up to 50% by 2050. And interestingly, in this article they haven't taken any Indian studies, and the Indian data is not taken in this study. And the results of this study were basically based on the East Asian data, which shows high prevalence. So keeping this in mind, there was a lacuna in our literature that myopia is projected in world to affect 40% of world, 50% of world population by 2050, and it has got huge implications economically and socially. But in our Asian continent, the data is largely dominated by regions having high prevalence of myopia. In India, from historically, it is said that it is not that high prevalent. So there is still some uncertainty about the magnitude of myopia burden in Indian school going children. And as we can see, our population is one of the highest, having children less than 18 years old. So according to census 2011, it is around 492 million, 49.2 crore people. So previously we have done one research, and we have found that the average prevalence of myopia in urban school going children is in Delhi, in northern region, is around 13%. So we did a systematic published literature identification since 1979, since the time it is available on PubMed, and we all stratified it in various age groups, in the age group of 5 to 15 year age group. So basically our aim was to collect all the published data that was published till date, and then to organize it in various age groups, and then to identify any pattern. So data was stratified into 5-year age groups from 5 to 15 years. And especially we want to see what was the difference between urban and rural prevalence. So we also stratified on the basis of urban or rural. Random effects meta-analysis was done. And this was our Prisma reporting summary of review strategy. At the end, we could find easily 59 studies which suited our inclusion criteria. And these were quality assessed also. So when we assessed 59 index studies, it was covering around 1.66 lakh urban children and 1.2 lakh rural children, which was pretty high number. And we found that the overall prevalence of myopia over the last 4 decades was around 7.5%, with confidence interval from 6.5 to 8.5%. And there was more myopia in urban people, in urban school going children, 8.5% as compared to rural. So when we studied the time trends, that is from the last decade, we compared from the last decade with the previous decades, we found that the prevalence of myopia increased up to 12% in urban settings. As we can see, from 1979 to 2008, it was around 7.8%, and from 2009 to 2020, averagely it was around 9%. So it was not that much as expected in the Brian Holden study. So that was our major aim, that myopia is prevalent, but it is not going to touch 50% of the population by 2050, seeing these trends. But interestingly, we also found in rural population, the prevalence of myopia increased from 4.57% to 6.7%, and there is approximately a 48% increment. Mind you, in urban settings, there was only a 12% increment, and in rural settings, there were 48% increment. So we found that the myopia is also pacing up in the rural settings. Previously, it was found that it is all believed that rural children, the myopia prevalence is less, but now we are seeing that though it is less, but it is still catching up with the urban. And maximum prevalence is of myopia. Yes, sir.
Subhash ji, please mute. Mute. Yeah, correct.
Sir, so maximum prevalence of myopia, when we studied it age groups wise, so maximum prevalence of myopia was in the urban age group of 11 to 15 years, that came out around to 15%. So our previous study also showed that it was around 13.5%. Here also averagely it was coming out to be 15%. So this trend continues to be in confirmation with our cohort studies also. So we found that we found that there is myopia is a major public health problem in urban and rural adolescents requiring urgent efforts, and there is a significant increase in the prevalence of myopia in rural children, maybe because of changing rural environment, maybe because of increased spectacle acceptance and increased access to healthcare facilities, but this needs to be taken care of in planning further policies. So this is the first Indian study which showed the time trends of myopia over the last 4 decades in rural and urban settings, and it has for the first time showed that the myopia is rapidly increasing, 48% versus 12% as compared to the urban parts, and there are large number of quality assessed studies which have been published till now. Limitations is there is no assessment of gender-based variation, and we do not assess the epidemiology of high myopia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deva. It was wonderful presentation. Any questions from judges? 1 or 2? You can unshare your screen, Deva.
Yes.
Any questions from the judges? Still somebody is asking another question. May I ask you one question, Dr. Divya? That is about use of less concentration atropine drops nowadays. What is your opinion?
So 0.01% atropine for myopia. Hello? Sir,
Yes,
0.01% atropine you were asking?
Yeah.
Sir, actually the studies have shown ATOM1, ATOM2, ATOM3 studies that 0.01% atropine is for moderate myopes, mild to moderate myopes. It is effective in children 6 to 12 years of age group, and it has shown to prevent the progression of myopia. So currently trials are also there in Indian settings also. It basically acts, the exact mechanism of its action is not yet known, but it has been hypothesized that it reduces axial elongation. So basically it helps in the prevention of myopia.
Thank you. Any question from the judges? Till the judge can ask the next
Yes.
question. Somebody else can be ready and raise your hand if you are ready with your presentation. Yes, sir.
Divya, can I ask you?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. Good morning, sir.
Good afternoon. It is in Indian school, no?
Yes,
Are you
sir.
doing anything particular about urban school or rural schools? This study?
Sir, the aim of the study was that rural schools are highly underrepresented in the Indian policies also. So
No,
most
you-
of our school vision program is basically.
Where you have done the study?
Sir,
From
in
who-
my study, we have shown that rural is progressing fast as compared to urban. So it was a preliminary observational study to see the impact of the increase of myopia. So
No,
iske baad hi, sir,
what you
intervention-
have done? I am just asking what you have done. What you have done, in which school you have conducted?
Sir, in our we have conducted in government schools of Delhi, sir. Government schools of Delhi.
Urban,
mid-
totally mostly urban area.
Mostly urban area.
Okay, fine. So you have not taken into consideration the rural part. So
Sir,
it may not represent the whole of the India.
Sir, in our meta-analysis included both studies from urban and rural parts. So we did our initial study, cohort study in the urban age group, and then we tried to analyze whether it is conforming to the trends. So we included all the published literature of various urban and rural school-based studies, and we did the analysis.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Divya. Next presenter, Dr.
Ready?
Rakesh. Dr. Rakesh, are you ready? No. Then anyone? Now
I think Mihir and Rakesh will not come probably.
Okay. Dr. Priyanka, are you ready?
Those who are absent means
Yes.
they may not come.
Okay. Dr.
proceed.
Priyanka Sudhakar is ready.
Yes,
Yes.
she can
Priyanka
start.
Sudhakar, your number is 1449. That is on the
Yeah.
next page for
Yes,
all the
sir.
details. Yeah.
Yes.
You can start your presentation, and I
Yes.
request the technical team to start the timer also, please. And Anusha, you are ready after Dr. Priyanka.
I'm ready, sir.
Now Priyanka Sudhakar is presenting.
Is my screen visible, sir?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. So I'll be presenting on viral keratouveitis and glaucoma. So elevated intraocular pressure and secondary glaucoma are known to be common sequelae of uveitis. And A keratouveitis is basically a component of an active corneal disease with an anterior chamber inflammation. And in our retrospective study, we elucidate the various clinical features of viral keratouveitis, the development of ocular hypertension and subsequent glaucoma, and their prognosis and management. So we have collected records from the outpatient departments of glaucoma, cornea, and uvea from 2015 to 2020. And patients aged 18 years or older and diagnosed with viral KU were included. Etiological subclassification was based on clinical presentation. So presence of epithelial dendrites or stromal keratitis with an element of anterior uveitis and typically elevated intraocular pressure was classified as HSV. In addition, facial skin lesions with typical dermatomal distribution was classified as VZV and varicella zoster. And CMV, there's only one case, which was, however, PCR proven in our study. So we collected the age, sex, the laterality, the number of uveitic episodes, and the follow-up duration in months. And a pressure more than 22 millimeter of mercury was taken as elevated intraocular pressure. So we collected the data on anti-segment, the intraocular pressure, the fundus picture, the treatment per se. So 55 eyes of 53 patients were analyzed, and the follow-up duration was an average of 2 years. Most of the patients were 25 years or older, and the mean age was 45.4 years with a male preponderance. 80% were HSV. And the BCV8 presentation, 40 out of the 55 eyes, majority were 20 by 200 or better. And this was either maintained at the final visit or some of the eyes even improved, with only one eye worsening to no perception of light. The most common ocular features in our study were corneal edema, keratic precipitates, and AC reaction, followed by Descemet's folds, dendritic ulcer, and reduced corneal sensation. The average Cubist ratio was 0.4, while that in glaucoma patients was 0.7. Ocular hypertension was present in 43.6% of our patients, and 21.8% developed secondary glaucoma. Recurrence in terms of uveitic episode or reactivation of keratitis was seen in all our patients. However, ocular hypertension in these cases was there only in 36.4%. And this was especially higher in the HSV and the CMV group. So we compared the intraocular pressure spikes and glaucoma, and we found that the higher number of spikes, 2 to 5, were associated with 50% chance of developing glaucoma, whereas when it increased to more than 5, it increased to 80%. And recurrence again was also associated with, that is more than 5 episodes were associated with requirement of a filtration surgery. Most of the patients did well with medical therapy alone, with topical steroids and oral antivirals as the basis. And additional anti-glaucoma medications were required only in 27% of the cases. So out of the 20 eyes, 5 required trabeculectomy with MMC, and 1 each required cyclophotocoagulation and cataract surgery, and 2 ended up with keratoplasty. So majority of our patients had HSV as the etiological basis. And 44% was the incidence of ocular hypertension. This was comparable with other results where it was 45 to 50% in the other studies. The uveitic glaucoma was present in 20% of our patients. And more importantly, we found that fewer than 5 episodes were associated with 20 to 50% chances of developing glaucoma. And the same risk increased to 80% with more than 5 hypertensive episodes. And this was clinically significant. Most of the patients benefited with medical therapy, and this was our medical regimen that we followed. And amongst the anti-glaucoma medications, the most commonly we used dorzolamide with a fixed dose combination of brimonidine and timolol. So surgical intervention was required only in 7% of the total VKU population, and this was especially more in more number of uveitic episodes, more than 5. Limitations were the retrospective nature, the smaller sample size, and the clinical basis of subclassification. And it was not really PCR proven, especially except the CMV one. However, considering the cost to the patient in developing countries, the long-term treatment, and the largely beneficial regimen of steroids and antivirals, this could be justified. So one has to keep in mind the recurrences are not only associated with increased risk of development of glaucoma, but also a greater propensity for a surgical intervention. And hence a prompt multi-speciality cross-referral in high-risk cases and in recurrences is important in providing a better outcome to these patients. Thank you.
You can put your video on, Dr. Priyanka.
Yes, sir.
And for all the presenters, if your network is quite fine, put your video on when you are presenting, so that we come to know about the presenter. Any questions? Any questions from the judges? You can unshare your screen, Dr. Priyanka.
Yes.
Any questions from the judges?
Question.
Taneja ji, unmute,
Am I
bolo.
audible?
Yes, please.
So you said in your thing, HSV is very commonly associated with the glaucoma, isn't it?
Yes.
So which stages of HSV is it very common?
So
usually you will
most
see in
of-
disciform.
Most of our
Even if
patients were stromal keratitis more than the epithelial variant of HSV, sir. So most of them were either stromal or, like you mentioned, a disciform.
Deciform keratitis usually seen. No, even epithelial keratitis will not have.
Very, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, all your
Acha,
cases have,
Priyanka,
Yes, sir.
can I ask you?
Yes, sir.
What is the main reading of the glaucoma patients?
Uh,
IOP?
It was variable, sir. In CMV, it was very, very high. It was more than 40-50 mm of mercury. Whereas in HSV and HZV, it was variable from 24 to 30, maybe around. It was variable reading, sir. But yeah, the maximum was in CMV patients.
In which instrument you are doing? All patients were done in which instruments?
Goldman applanation tonometer, but if the Myers were not very regular, then tonopen was used.
You have not used the time. At what time you are taking the reading in Goldman? While taking the reading?
No, sir, because the patients had come at varied intervals, so that was
So
not.
then the results will not be matching, no? All cases. Okay, thank you. Thank you for you.
Okay.
I think it was a wonderful point by sir. Thank you, Dr. Priyanka.
Thank you.
After you, I just read the sequence here, Dr. Anusha, and after Dr. Anusha, Dr. Mihir. Is it okay, Dr. Mihir?
Sure, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Anusha will be presenting. The timer will be on. Her video, I request her to start her video and share the screen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Can I start,
Anusha?
sir?
Dr. Anusha
Yes,
is
sir.
on the second page, third last for the judges. Yeah, you can start.
Yes, sir. So good morning, all. My topic is kids and keratoconus and underdiagnosed enigma. So there's no financial disclosure. Pediatric keratoconus is an underdiagnosed enigma because it is more aggressive and advanced at the time of diagnosis. And once diagnosis is done, there is high rate of progression documented in pediatric population. The need for the study was whatever the articles and the multiple studies done so far is mainly based on management. And there is paucity of literature about the need for screening kids with astigmatism. And there's less awareness among pediatric ophthalmologists regarding the same issue. So methodology adopted was a retrospective case study in which 80 eyes of 55 patients were included, all by less than 15 years of age, and tomographically diagnosed retrospective data. The files were collected and using Amsler-Crumish classification, which includes myopia and astigmatism, mean central K values, corneal thickness, and corneal scarring. The keratoconus was graded into different stages. So among the patients who presented to us, the stage at when they presented was 33% in the stage 1, 25% in stage 2, stage 3, 21%, and stage 4, 8.75%. But also the acute eye drops were seen most commonly, which we have to stress among the pediatric population because of high progression, and that was around 8 to 9%. So the age at presentation was mostly 12 to 15 years of age, leading to 45% of data. And among 6 to 9 years of age, there was 20%. This is the age group which is challenging to us because they will not be cooperating enough for our evaluation. So risk factors was mainly the ocular allergy. Among them, the VKC was most commonly seen, and less associations were family history, Down syndrome, Marfan's, and retinitis pigmentosa. And in 22.5%, there was no association at all. So that also has to be kept in mind while checking the pediatric age group. Gender prevalences, the male preponderance was seen around 80% and female being 20%. Vision at presentation, the best corrected visual acuity, the most common was between the 6/24 to 660 vision, the middle vision chart ones. And the other ones was between 6 to 9 and 6 by 18, and less than 6 by 60 was about 25%. The type of treatment adopted was most commonly corneal collagen cross-linking. About 50% underwent that. And next comes the rigid gas permeable contact lenses, among 22.5%, and less were lamellar keratoplasty, desmetopexy, and Rose-K lenses. So when should we evaluate a child for ectasia is in the routine refraction whenever a child comes to our OPD, whenever we see a sudden increase in regular astigmatism or scissoring, even a slightest suspicion should have a low threshold for further evaluation. And in case of meridional amblyopia, when it is not improving also, it has to be evaluated. And high myopia more than 6, and risk factors such as ocular allergy, retinitis pigmentosa, Marfan's, Down syndrome, and family history, it has to be evaluated aggressively. So underage keratoconus should not be taken lightly, and procedures such as collagen cross-linking gives the impressive results in pediatric population. The conclusion is the higher percentage of allergic conjunctivitis in kids with keratoconus. In our study, it was 60%. We have to always rule out corneal ectasia in Down syndrome, and understanding the predisposing risk factors helps in stratification. Also, we can customize the management strategies to prevent the further progression of keratoconus. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anusha. I think some time was left. You have finished little early.
So timer
So-
was not seen, so I just rushed, sir,
Still
thinking that it would be
2 minutes
timer.
are still there. 2 minutes are still
Okay.
there.
Okay.
If you want to utilize, you can still utilize and you can still continue.
No,
then-
sir, I'm done with it, sir.
I think the topic is open for discussion, judges, and you can have little more questions because you have utilized less time. Yes, Dr. Taneja ji.
Sir, Dr. Anusha, when do you start doing this collagen cross linkage, at which age?
So whenever a patient actually in the adult population, we wait and watch, sir, and also to increase the astigmatism for more than one diopter. But in pediatric, it is seen that whenever a patient present with Down syndrome or Marfan's, when there is risk factor, we should not wait. We have to just go ahead with the corneal collagen cross-linking. But whenever a child is cooperative enough, like 8 to 9 years of age, when it's cooperative for the evaluation, we can just wait and watch, sir. But when the risk factors are present, we should not wait. You have to directly go ahead with collagen cross-linking.
So for small children, do you use general anesthesia or some injections?
Sir, general anesthesia, because the duration is longer time, and the child initially, whoever appears to be cooperative also will not cooperative in the middle of the process, sir.
Excuse me.
Okay, next question.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
What is the normal average corneal thickness you see in your age group children, and what protocol you are used? Whether you used a normal standard protocol, Dresden protocol, or accelerated? How many required accelerated protocol? How do you decide?
So it was a retrospective data, sir, taken from the cornea department, basically. So whatever protocol was a standard protocol they have used. And in Down syndrome patients and all, when the child was not cooperative at all, using the scissoring itself, without going for the tomography, we have taken them for collagen cross-linking. And that's it, sir. Only accelerated protocol was used in such children. But rest of the children who were cooperative, the standard protocols was used, sir.
Well, Anusha, may I ask one question?
Yes, sir.
I think when the pediatric age group, those patients are coming to your OPD. Nowadays,
sir.
there are many more patients, they are having cylinder.
Yes,
Now,
sir.
clinically, suppose there is a cylinder.
Yes, sir.
Okay. When do you suspect keratoconus? With what much
whenever a
cylinder in
patient-
what?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
yeah, please.
So whenever a patient is coming to us, whenever there's a cylinder of more than 1.5 diopters, sir, and also if there is irregular astigmatism, we suspect, and also when a routine retinoscopy is done, a scissoring is seen, we usually suspect it's better to rule out keratoconus than to keep quiet. So if the patient is cooperative, we directly subject them for tomography. But then if the child is not cooperative, using our retinoscopy itself, and also the follow-up, if the astigmatism increases, or if there is amblyopia which is not coming, the vision is not improving, or if there is any change in the axis, we then suspect it, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Any question? Yeah, sir.
Anusha, one interesting
Yes,
question.
sir.
That's just,
Yes,
just
sir.
interesting. Interesting.
Yes, sir.
Nothing to. You have told it is
Okay.
epidemiology of pediatric keratoconus, no?
Yes, sir.
Up to what is the pediatric age?
So we have considered it to be less than 15 years of age, sir.
Is it pediatric age? What about
So
the
actually
16?
there is controversy still the adolescent age group but in our study we have considered up
So
to
are they
15
pediatric
years.
patients or is it any bar on that? Is it only 15 or 14 or 16?
So that
That interesting, that
definition is keeping
controversy I am
on.
going to ask. I
Yes,
am
sir.
asking to that controversy only.
Yes, sir. It is a controversy, sir, I agree. But in Indian population, even in the pediatrician, the normal pediatrician sees patients up till 15 years of age. So in that way consideration, the 15 years age group was fixed for us.
So
I agree that controversy is there.
that there controversy there. So
Yes,
your
sir.
topic could have been very interesting if you say could have mentioned epidemiology
Yes,
of
sir.
pediatric keratoconus in
Yes, sir.
up to
Less
15
than
years or
15.
something age limit.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. I should
Thank
have
you.
done
These
this.
are
Thank you, sir.
nothing. Okay.
What
Okay,
was the
thank you.
minimum
Thank you.
age of the patient? What you have evaluated?
So
Minimum age?
6 years, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I hope
Thank
there is no more question. Now, you can lower your hand, Dr. Anusha. Number
Yes,
one.
sir.
Number
Yes,
two,
sir.
Dr. Mihir to be ready. And number three is someone else who is ready with the presentation? Just let me know so that the person will be in the queue. Who is the next person who wants to present? Abhishek, okay. Najneen, okay. Okay, now you can lower your hands at present, but afterwards you can raise your hands once Dr. Mihir finishes. Dr. Mihir, you can start.
Yes,
please.
sir.
And the timer will be on.
Sure, sir. Are my slides visible and am I audible, sir?
Yes.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to make a presentation of opportunistic screening of ametropia and embryogenic factors in children using Bruckner test in the hands of pediatrician. I have no financial conflict in this presentation, and this research was approved by Institutional Review Board. It was a thesis topic of one of our pediatric residents. Opportunistic screening is basically early detection of a disease or its risk factor in people who present to healthcare providers for various other complaints. So it's an additional test and a voluntary test offered by healthcare providers for common diseases. For example, when we check intraocular pressure for a patient who comes for presbyopia correction, or when a sonographer looks at fatty liver screening on routine abdominal ultrasound. Its advantages are, number one, it's highly cost effective in comparison with the population-based screening. It can significantly reduce the disease load by detection of undiagnosed pathology. And of course, it tends to create better physician-patient relationship. There are WHO criteria based on which you can decide which disease is amenable for such kind of opportunistic screening and which test could be useful for performing this opportunistic screening. Ametropia and embryogenic factors in children do satisfy this criteria because it has a prevalence of at least 5%, raising up to 20 or even 30%. More than 50% of these ametropic or embryopic factors tend to remain undiagnosed in children. It can be effectively treated with optical correction and or patching, especially if detected in time. And it has a very high impact on improvement of quality of life by restoring vision as well as binocular fusion. In fact, it's one of the most cost-effective intervention across the world in medical sciences. And the test, which is amenable for use as a screening test for this disease, has to be a simple yet rapid test, such as a Bruckner test. It can be easily learned by the pediatrician as well as pediatric residents and pediatric ophthalmology fellows. It has a high sensitivity and negative predictive value. So the aim of our study was to assess the validity of performing the Bruckner test, or in other words, the red reflect test, for the screening of refractive errors and embryogenic factors in a pediatric OPD. We included children coming to a pediatric OPD of a corporate general hospital in Thane who were not sick, cooperative enough, and were aged between 1 and 16 years of age. And the methods used were Number one, the pediatric resident performed the Bruckner test, followed by pediatric ophthalmology fellow who performed the same test in the same manner, followed by Plus Optics S12 vision screener, which is a machine-based photo screening using the same principles. And finally, the gold standard was pediatric optometrist who performed cycloplegic refraction and the evaluation of the patient. American Academy of Ophthalmology endorses routine red reflex test. And as you see on the right side, this is how the Bruckner test is used to find out presence of ametropia in children. The inferior bright crescent means myopia, superior bright crescent reaching to the center of the pupil means hypermetropia, and decenter crescents, as you see in the lower panels, are astigmatisms. S12 vision screener is used at a particular distance, as you see over here, and it comes out with the report of referral or no referral. The standard of referral is based on American Academy of Ophthalmology S12 vision referral criteria, which are age specific and the type of error specific. And the criteria for referral using the Bruckner test are relatively lower threshold criteria, as you see over here, with myopia of more than 1 diopter, astigmatism of 1.5 diopter, hypermetropia of more than 1 diopter, and anisometropia of more than 1 diopter need to be referred. Pass and fail criteria also includes presence of squint more than 8 PD is failed in the test, and media opacity of 1.5 or more millimeter in the visual axis also calls for referral for eye checkup. We had 120 patients, exactly 10% of the attendings during the study period. Mean age of the children recruited was 5.2 years, of which 50% were boys. And out of 120 children, 35 were found to have an abnormality, which is a very high prevalence of ocular disease in a pediatric setup. Pediatric resident could identify 31 out of those 35 children. Pediatric ophthalmology fellow could identify 29 out of those 35, and S12 vision screener could identify 30. This is the comparison of performance of the Bruckner test between pediatric resident, pediatric ophthalmology fellow, and the photo screener. And as you see over here, the sensitivity and negative predictive value were the highest in the hands of pediatric resident, but the specificity and predictive positive value was significantly low, reducing the accuracy in hands of the pediatric resident. The cause of low specificity and positive predictive value was because of lack of accommodation, because most of pseudomyopes were falsely diagnosed as being a referral or fail. And as you see over here, once you improve the fixation target for distance or quantify the astigmatism.
Dr. Mihir, your time is up. Please sum up.
Yes, sir. And the limitation of the study is the lack of data on how it will improve the positive predictive value as well as the specificity in the hands of pediatric resident. So my conclusion is the Bruckner test is a useful and simple test for the opportunistic screening of children attending the pediatrician's office in the hands of pediatrician and pediatric resident. It has a high sensitivity and negative predictive value. False positives can be reduced by distance fixation target and better training. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mihir. It was a wonderful presentation. I think you can unshare your screen, lower your hand, and judges are requested for their questions. Any questions from the judges? No question. I think it was a foolproof presentation probably. Anybody? Yes, you can unmute yourself. Yeah. We are not getting you. Tanak Chalji. You want to say something? You are not audible, sir. You are not audible.
Hello.
Yeah, now you are audible. Yeah.
Just for curiosity sake, you what is the pattern of reflex you see in strabismic cases? Strabismus. You said ametropia, you got different pattern, crescent, upper, and what about in strabismic?
I'm really sorry. I'm not able to hear you, sir.
You can repeat. Yeah, repeat the question, please.
Hello. In a Bruckner test, you said that is different patterns in hemetropics, anisometropias, isn't it? So what about the patterns you observe usually in strabismic pattern, strabismus, squint?
Marathe sir, can you please repeat his question? I'm not able to hear, sir.
Am I not audible?
Please loudly, sir. Loudly. Yeah.
So you said in hemetropias, hello, in anisometropia, you said with the Bruckner's test, you have different patterns like a crescent shaped or inferior,
Yes.
superior crescent.
Yes,
What
sir.
about in strabismus?
So in strabismus, there is only leakage of the light. You will find the eye which is misaligned will have significantly increased illumination in the red reflex. Whether it is ESO or exo or hyper or hypo, you will be able to pick it up because the light leaks out of it. And there is an optical principle behind it, which is confirmed by the beam splitter ophthalmoscopy. So you won't get any specific pattern for type of strabismus. Of course, torsional strabismus cannot be picked up using Bruckner test, only the vertical and horizontal or diagonals.
What about in mixed pattern with anisometropia and strabismus together in a mixer?
So anisometropia can be picked up by looking at the type of light reflex. If patient has inferior crescent, it's a myopic eye. If there is a superior crescent, it's a hypermetropic eye. And when you go close to the patient, in anisometropic patient, you will find a significant change in the reflex. But in a patient who has strabismus, while you are performing Bruckner test, you reduce the distance and go close to the patient's eyes, you will find no change in the reflex. So you can differentiate.
Thank you, Dr. Mir, for the wonderful.
Sir, can I ask one question, sir?
Of course, sir.
Thank you,
sir. You are welcome, sir.
Okay, that is a wonderful presentation. Actually, quite new also. I had one question like, is there any threshold value of the ametropia that can increase the sensitivity or specificity of this test? Did you find ametropia up to a certain value being picked up easily or can be picked up easily?
So when we looked at the data of false positives, we found it was primarily the pseudomyopia which was causing lack of ability to differentiate it from the negatives. We were diagnosing them as having positives. So it was not the threshold value in that segment. In the second segment where we had false positives was astigmatism. So if you increase your threshold for astigmatism to 2 diopter or more, you will be able to pick up less false positives. So decentration of the reflex by more than 1 clock hour was our criteria for referral. But if you say 2 clock hours or more of decentration as the referral criteria, which means probably there is a higher obliqueness of the astigmatism or there is higher magnitude of astigmatism, you could probably improve your false positivity rates.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mir. I think we should move forward because of want of time. Now the next presenter in the queue. Hello. Yeah, Dr. Abhishek, and after Dr. Abhishek, Dr. Nazneen. Okay, Dr. Abhishek, please. You can start your presentation with sharing the screen, and timer will be on by the team.
So my screen is visible? Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. My title of a free paper. My PPT is the full screen. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My title of a free paper is on intracameral morphofluorescence efficacy in reducing the post-operative endophthalmitis rate, a retrospective study analysis. Endophthalmitis post-surgery modern is very uncommon. With a modern operating room and advanced autoclave facility, the reported incidence of post-operative endophthalmitis ranging from 0.01 to 0.36% among the different surgical procedures, various study in different country. The numerous clinical trial and retrospective study has been carried out to check the efficacy of intracameral antibiotic. Here in this study, we initiated giving the intracameral amoxicillin mandatory at the end of every cataract surgery. And after 1 year, the studies aim to determine use insurance in the community patient. Research for 2 years. The study population of undergoing cataract surgery and program under NPCB by Government of India. Inclusion criteria: the patient undergoing immediate cataract extraction and a documented follow-up at the institute. Exclusion criteria: the patient undergoing the procedure elsewhere, any combined procedure with cataract, post-traumatic or pediatric cataract extraction. We have divided the study population into group 1 and group 2. The patient operated for the cataract surgery between 1st April 2018 to 31st March 2019 with group 2. The patient operated.
I think your presentation is gone. Screen sharing is stopped. And are you there or you
Hardly audible?
And you are also out of the room, I think. Okay. The next person.
Yes, sir.
You will be given the opportunity to present afterwards. Now, till then, Dr. Nazneen. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes. Am I audible, sir?
Put your video on.
Okay. Sir.
You are audible. Put your video on and then share the screen. Dr. Abhishek, in between, you can just prepare because your voice was not clear. In between, you can start. Prepare for that. Yeah. Dr. Nazneen, please.
Okay, sir.
Am I visible, sir? My slide is visible?
Yes, yes.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to present a comparative study on sodium bicarbonate versus sodium hyaluronidase in ocular regional anesthesia. Introduction: the goal of a safe and effective anesthetic preparation of intraocular surgery was to obtain the adequate anesthesia and the echinacea without creating any complications and at the same time keeping normal intraocular pressure. Traditionally, the anesthetic solution uses a mixture of the 30 ml 2% lignocaine with 1:2 lakh dilution of adrenaline and 450 units, that is 50 unit per ml hyaluronidase. Galindo reported that the altering the pH of the local anesthetic solution with sodium bicarbonate 1:10 mixture with lignocaine or bupivacaine, the time of onset and the spread of the neural blockade could be enhanced significantly. At the same time, it is simple and inexpensive. The aim of the object is to determine whether the onset of the echinacea as by 7.5% sodium bicarbonate buffer lignocaine was quickened produced by the traditionally used hyaluronidase with lignocaine as far as peribulbar anesthesia prior to cataract was concerned. Materials and the methods. Patient was examined for the best-corrected visual acuity and segment examination with slit lamp. Dilated fundoscopy USG was done in case of the hazy media. Intraocular pressure was evaluated. Systemic examination was done, namely blood pressure and the blood sugar. Methods and the materials. The OST visual acuity was taken out for the first operation first. The second eye was taken out for the surgery 1 week later. The first eye received a traditional anesthetic mixture of the lignocaine with sodium hyaluronidase, and anesthetic mixture was made by the augmenting 30 cc ampoule containing 2% lignocaine plus 1:2 lakh adrenalines with 15 unit of sodium hyaluronidase. And this group was stable as the first eye group. And a patient who went an uneventful cataract surgery was taken out for the second surgery of the another eye by the next week. These eyes received an anesthetic preparation of the 6 ml of the lignocaine plus adrenaline 1:2 lakh mixed with 1.5 ml of 7.5% sodium bicarbonate. And this group was named as the second eye group. Exclusion criteria: primary and the secondary glaucoma, corneal and the retinal pathology, other ocular surgery, patient over 90 years of age, mentally challenged patients, and cardiac complications of any kind. Observations: out of 250 patients, 12 patients had to be rejected from the final analysis for the reasons: age above the 90 years 4, mentally challenged 1, non-consented 3, cardiac disease 2, unsatisfactory surgery in the first eye 2. The table number 2 is showing the age distribution of the patient. The 128 were female and 112 were males. Table number 3 is showing, as far as akinesia was concerned, 35% of the eyes in the group of first eye had completed completed akinesia at the end of the 5 minutes, 60% patient at the end of the 7 minutes, and 5% at the end of the 10 minutes. The mean time to obtain akinesia in the study was 8.8 minutes. In contrast, 70% of the patient of the second eye group had complete block at the end of the 5 minutes. The mean time of akinesia was 7.2 minutes. Discuss on the idea of the choosing of the both eyes of the same patients for the was the time onset, which was significance. The protocol and this protocol eliminate the inter-patient's variability and the bias during the statistical analysis. The most local anesthetics are supplied as acidic salt to avoid the precipitation during the sipping and the storage. It has been demonstrated that alternating form in the active form of the drug, and therefore alkalinizations of the anesthetic agent, as done with sodium bicarbonate, increases through the soft the penetration through the soft tissue and nerve sheath faster, resulting in a faster duration of the onset of the action. Limitation: the potential disadvantage is that precipitations may occur of sodium bicarbonate is added to lignocaine as a bolus. This avoided by slowing the adding sodium bicarbonate to lignocaine fixed volume of the alkalization. Conclusion: it can be concluded that alkalizations of the anesthetic preparation with sodium bicarbonate quickens the onset of the regional anesthesia during perivalvular anesthesia and can be considered the reasonable alternative to sodium hyaluronidase augmentation. Latter is not available at hand. Considering that the precious time can be used in situations where a large number of the surgery can be performed. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you had so many hurdles, background noise, and so many things. I'm sorry for that, probably. Any questions from the judges?
Yes, sir, I would like to ask Dr. Nazni. You have said that in the first group, first eye, 5% had akinesia at the end of 10 minutes. How do you explain that? At the end of 7 minutes, it was about 60%. At the end of 10 minutes, it was 5%. What does that mean?
Sir, we used a stopwatch and we asked the patient to move his eye, the right side, left side, and up and down.
Why the percentage decreased suddenly from 60% at 7 minutes? It decreased to 5% at 10 minutes.
It probably due to the increase the penetration of anesthesia due to soft tissue and neural tissue.
It means that 95% of the patient lost the effect of anesthesia. What you have written, what you have presented, that means 95% of the patients, they did not have anesthetic effect. So there is some mistake in the printing. Now it cannot be 5%, it can be 90%, it can be 95% at the end of 10 minutes.
Okay.
Another question, how did you actually mix both these things, xylocaine and the sodium bicarbonate? How do you actually do it?
Sir, that is is was taken in 6 ml. 6 ml, that is 4.5 ml of lignocaine with adrenaline and 1.5 ml of sodium bicarbonate.
So how do you actually do it? Do you take first xylocaine, then aspirate the sodium sodium bicarbonate, or you first take the sodium bicarbonate? Do you take in the syringe or do you inject in the vial?
Sir, I inject in the vial.
You take in the vial. So that means first you discard, if the vial is of 30 ml, you discard the contents. For mixing it with a 4.5 ml, you will discard the rest of the contents of the xylocaine vial.
No, sir. It has used for the next patient.
So it is asking you to take that particular amount. The vial is having little more volume. So what will you do about that remaining volume before mixing? That is the question.
Simple question, Nazanin. Can I interfere? Nazanin, have you done yourself? Have you done the mixture yourself? Nazanin,
Yes,
have
sir.
you done yourself the mixture anytime? Prepared the? Have you given the injection yourself?
Actually, no, sir.
Have you seen at least? Have you seen somebody doing
Is
it?
it a single prick or both prick? Single prick or both prick, upper and lower? Peribulbar you mentioned, no?
Yes, sir. That is
Single prick method or double prick method?
double prick method, sir.
You have seen somebody doing? You
Yes,
have,
sir. I have done
you have
peribulbar.
seen somebody loading? You have seen somebody loading the things? No.
Yes.
You have not done anything. Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you, beta.
Don't be nervous. I think these are the practical tips from our seniors, and that is the way how one learns.
So the concept is excellent, sir. Sir, we can replace injection hyaluronidase with sodium bicarbonate, which is much cheaper.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there was any difference in the pain occurring at the time of injection. The decrease in pH or the increasing the pH, did it have any influence on the pain when you give the injection? Perhaps she has not done it herself.
Forget it, sir.
Thank you, sir.
She is not a
I'm
retinal
sorry
member.
if you joined late, but I just would like to add that previously also we had this sodium bicarbonate, but there was lots of edema. So I just want to ask to speaker, she also faced that problem.
I think she has left.
Forget it. She has gone. She, yeah.
Should we take the next speaker?
It's okay.
I think considering the time left, there are three more speakers now. Dr. Rakesh, are you there? Dr. Rakesh? Then Dr. Abhishek Patel, are you there? Yeah. Abhishek, you can start. For
Yes,
the,
sir.
Yeah, backup team, I request the timer with the raise hand so that it is seen by the presenter. The timer window can be with the raise hand. Dr. Abhishek, you can have your video on if possible. If the good connectivity is
Sir,
there, and share your
I would
screen.
request if I keep.
Okay, no issue.
I want
no
my.
Yeah.
Because of the heavy rain, the internet is not so stable right now.
I know.
So I'm keeping my video. Okay.
Okay.
I'm starting.
No problem. Yeah.
Am my screen is visible?
Yes. Put the timer on. Backup team. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My title of a free paper is on intracameral moxifloxacin efficacy in reducing the postoperative endophthalmitis rate or retrospective analysis. As you know, the endophthalmitis post-surgery modern era is very uncommon. The modern operating room and advanced autoclave facility, the incidence of postoperative endophthalmitis ranges from 0.01 to 0.36% among the different surgical procedure, various study and different country. The numerous clinical trial and retrospective study has been carried out to check the efficacy of intracameral antibiotic. Here in this study, we initiated giving intracameral moxifloxacin mandatory at the end of every cataract surgery. After 1 year, this study is aimed to determine the reduced incidence of endophthalmitis and its significance. The aim is the role of intracameral moxifloxacin in preventing postoperative endophthalmitis in the community patients. It is a retrospective study of 2 years. A study population with the patient undergoing cataract surgery under DBCS program under NPCB by Government of India. Inclusion criteria: the patient undergoing age-related cataract extraction and a documented follow-up at our institute. Exclusion criteria: the patient undergoing the procedure elsewhere and any combined procedure with cataract, post-traumatic or pediatric cataract extraction. We have divided the study population into two groups, Group 1 and Group 2. The patient operated for the cataract surgery 1st April 2018 to 31st March 2019 without receiving any intracameral moxifloxacin as a prophylaxis. And Group 2 is the patient operated from 1st April 2019 to 31st March 2020 who received intracameral moxifloxacin as a prophylaxis. The patient was further divided on the basis of the intraoperative complication like PCR. The Group A and Group B. The Group A patient with a PCR with a no prophylaxis intracameral moxifloxacin given, and Group B, the patient with the PCR in which the moxifloxacin intracameral moxifloxacin is given. So the detailed systemic evaluation and physical fitness from the physician is obtained. Cataract workup as usual done by slit lamp examination, fundus examination, Roplast check, syringing if necessary. After the patient selected for the cataract surgery, topical antibiotic moxifloxacin started 1 hourly 1 day prior to the surgery in both the eyes. Manual small incision cataract surgery was performed, superior temporal scleral tunnel incision, cataract extracted, and a rigid 6 mm PMA IOL is implanted. At the end of surgery, 0.1 ml of antibiotic moxifloxacin injected intracamerally in all the cases. Post-operative protocol: all the patient kept admitted for 1 day post-operatively. Topical antibiotic plus steroid drop is prescribed in the tapering dose. Post-operative follow-up at 1 week, 1 month, and 3 months. Patient living in a far peripheral area, follow-up was arranged at the primary healthcare center. On the suspicion of infection, immediate referral to the base hospital is instructed. When the endophthalmitis is suspected, the diagnosis is confirmed by vitreous biopsy, AC-tap, and clinical examination. The cultural and sensitive test of the correct sample is done. If any surgical complications such as PCR or vitreous loss are recorded for the patient operative data sheet. Now, as you can see in the result, the table 1, as you can see, total 40,392 surgeries were performed in the 2 year of study period. The table 1 shows that there is decrease in the rate of endophthalmitis in Group 2 compared to Group 1. This is the spectrum of surgery, shows that majority of the surgery were conducted by senior consultant, followed by senior resident and junior resident. This is the table 2 show the comparison the rate of the endophthalmitis in a surgery with the complication PCR between both the groups. As there was no cases of PCR with endophthalmitis in Group B, the finding was insignificant. The table 3 shows the causative agent in the culture report of endophthalmitis cases. More than 50% of samples shows no growth in both the groups. And the discussion, the clinical endophthalmitis incidence in India is between 0.04% to 0.15%. In a 2 large eye care facility in India, the incidence was 0.08% and 0.16%. In our hospital, more than 100 cataract surgery performed per day, which include 80% of patients belong to the rural area with all spectrum of surgeon operating. Our institute rate of infection is in 2019-20 was 0.015%, which is very less compared to the other studies. The main change which what we have done in 2019-20 is the introduction of the intracameral antibiotic moxifloxacin at the end of the surgery. The rate of endophthalmitis in year 2019-20 was 0.015%, while in previous year it was 0.04%. We almost had 3-fold decrease in endophthalmitis rate compared to the previous year. Similar study carried by Haripriya et al. Shows that the intracameral moxifloxacin reduced the overall endophthalmitis rate by 3.5-fold. A similar study conducted by Harrington et al. And a clinical trial by ECRS showed the significant benefit of using intracameral antibiotic in comparison with the no prophylaxis or a topical antibiotic. The PCR is the most common intraoperative complication during the cataract surgery. In our study, the rate of endophthalmitis case for PCR was very less, causing our data to be statistically insignificant. The Wong et al. Report that the intraoperative PCR associated with the 8 to 11-fold higher risk of postoperative endophthalmitis. Haripriya et al. Shows that the PCR is a major risk factor of endophthalmitis, with the intracameral moxifloxacin help to reduce the rate of endophthalmitis. Moxifloxacin is the broad spectrum of coverage with activity against both gram-positive and negative bacteria. It's a biphasic with an initial dose-dependent activity profile. After injection, injecting it remains bactericidal for much longer compared to the cefuroxime. Moxifloxacin is cost-effective and easy to use. Considering the half-life of moxifloxacin, the dose of 0.5 milligram in 0.1 ml of moxifloxacin exceeds the median minimum inhibitor concentration of most endophthalmitis causing pathogen by almost 300 folds. So in conclusion, intracameral moxifloxacin is work best along with standardized topical antibiotic regime. Intracameral moxifloxacin is a cost-effective, easy to use, and community-based cataract surgery where large number of surgery take place under single roof. Intracameral moxifloxacin can be recommended routinely in all cases of prophylaxis as a prophylaxis dose. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abhishek. Till our judges ask any question to Dr. Abhishek, Dr. Abhinash, you unshare your screen, Dr. Abhishek first. Dr. Amina,
Yeah.
are you there? Hello, Dr. Amina. Amina Shah. Your name is not seen in our mark list if you are here because you have asked the question on the chat in the chat box. Amina Shah, are you here?
Pardon me, you're asking me?
No, ma'am. Amina Shah has asked one question
Yeah,
in the chat box that when is her turn, but as per our mark sheet, her name is not seen.
Okay.
Before the questions go, I'll just confirm one thing. Now the remaining people's name, I will just read. One is Dr. Rakesh Anjanappa. If he is ready, he should be here. Then Dr. Debolina Deb and Hiranmoy Das. These are the three people remaining. Am I right?
Okay.
Or someone has got any query to ask? Dr. Amina Shah, are you there?
Yes, Dr.
Okay.
Prakash, this is three contestants who are left, and Dr. Debolina has joined probably, and Dr. Hiranmay also is there.
Okay. Now we can have the sorry.
Yes, two contestants are there, Dr. Hiranmay and Dr. Debolina.
Okay. Now questions for Dr. Abhishek, one or two by the judges.
Kevin.
Yeah. Can anybody? No question. Okay. We'll move to the next. We'll move to the next speaker, Dr. Rakesh. Next presenter. Dr. Rakesh.
Yes, sir.
Share your screen.
Yes. Good morning. My topic is on ocular morbidity in natural patients in relation to the CD4 count and highly active antiretroviral therapy. I have no financial interest.
Continue. I think you had the connectivity.
Timer to continue also.
Yes.
We are running short as time.
Yeah.
Ocular manifestation of HIV infection more than 20 years ago is described by the MacLeod. It is a benign feature of HIV disease which is principally seen in patients with symptomatic disease or significantly reduced CD4 cell count. And etiology is poorly understood. It is mainly suggested due to the circulating immunocomplexes or to direct infection of the retina by HIV virus. 70 to 80% of the HIV infected patients have been treated for HIV associated retinopathy, which appear to be decreased with the development of heart therapy, and prevalence of blindness in these cases was seen 5 to 25%. My main objective was to determine the patterns of ocular manifestation and their correlation with CD4 T cell count and heart treatment, and to estimate the prevalence of ocular manifestations in HIV infected individuals. Methodology was it's a hospital-based cross-sectional study, and source of the study patients were taken from OPD undergoing visual acuity assessment and slit lamp and fundoscopy examination. Study period was from June 2018 to May 2019. Sample size was 200 HIV infected patients. We included HIV positive subjects registered at ART center and referred to the ophthalmologist in peripheral center. Subjects are presenting to the ophthalmology OPD directly, and HIV positive subjects of all ages. And we excluded patients with coexisting illness like diabetes mellitus and hypertension. Methodology collection of data was from detailed demographic data of HIV infected individuals and treatment history with heart therapy, and recent CD4 T cell counts were taken, and detailed ocular examination was done. And results were out of 200 HIV infected individuals, 46% had HIV related ocular manifestations. And in coming to gender distribution, males were affected than females, like 54%. In out of 200 patients, 56% were on heart treatment, and 44% were not on any treatment. In age distribution, it mainly affected from the 32 to 60 years. In that 40 to 49 years age were more affected. In vision was mainly in recording, it was shown that vision was more than 6/60. In CD4 cells count in ocular manifestations were having 48% in ocular manifested HIV patients. In the pie diagram showing that HIV microangiopathy was the most commonest ocular manifestation seen in those 200 HIV patients. An image showing that microvasculopathy and blood and thunder appearance in superior quadrant of the fundus is cytomegalovirus retinitis feature. Discussion: ocular lesions attributed to the HIV are seen in up to 2/3 of the estimated patient in HIV positive population in India, and HIV microvasculopathy is considered to be the commonest posterior segment HIV manifestation and is seen in up to 70% of the HIV patients. And cytomegalovirus retinitis is the commonest ocular opportunistic infection seen in India, even in the heart treatment. Cytomegalovirus retinitis is thought to be one of the most commonest vision threatening posterior segment manifestation of the HIV. Prevalence of the ocular manifestation is lower than that what is reported in previous study, but still it is reasonably high. Study concluded that CD4 cell count is important predictor of the ocular morbidity in HIV positive individuals, and prevalence of the ocular manifestation in HIV infected individuals appear to be decreased due to the heart treatment. And health education and comprehensive examination should be conducted in HIV infected individuals to reduce the ocular morbidity. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. At least one question from the judges, if possible.
I think we will be running shortage of time.
Yeah.
He's not a ratified member.
Okay.
So we can proceed on.
I'll share your screen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now only one presenter is remaining, Mr. Sai. Okay. Or two more. Hello. Who is the next presenter now? Devulena?
So shall I present now?
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
What is the name of the presenter? Means put your video.
So Devulena, sir.
Yeah. Please start. Share your screen.
So is it visible, sir?
Yes. You can put your video also on.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Yeah.
Good morning, respected judges and everyone. Today, my free paper topic is on study on effect of translaminar cribrosa pressure difference in glaucoma in South India. I have the nil financial disclosure for the study. Coming to the introduction, we know glaucoma is one of the causes of irreversible blindness worldwide, and in India, it is predicted to be around causing 20% of glaucoma population. Now, we are seeing that many cases of glaucoma are undetected due to the inaccessibility of quality healthcare, mostly in the rural areas, and most of it is because they are underdiagnosed or they present late to the ophthalmologist. We know the most common modifiable factor for glaucoma is raised IOP, but there have been further mechanisms that have been studied that can modify the treatment of glaucoma, because neither all patients of ocular hypertension develop glaucoma, nor is the IOP raised in cases of normal tension glaucoma. So because of this, there was a CSF theory of glaucoma postulated by Fishman and Berdahl that estimated that and defined the role of translaminar cribrosa pressure gradient on glaucomatous optic neuropathy. So the aim of my study was to assess the association of mean translaminar cribrosa pressure difference, mean IOP, and mean ocular perfusion pressure with glaucoma, and also compare these pressure parameters between primary open angle and angle closure glaucoma patients. It is a descriptive observation cross-sectional studies. I had 47 patients with glaucoma, included both their eyes, and 47 age and gender matched patients without glaucoma, which was my control group. The duration of my study was for 1 year, and the study location was in ophthalmology OPD in a tertiary care center in Chennai. I included all the patients who were first time diagnosed with primary open angle and angle closure glaucoma. I excluded the patients whose fundus could not be seen clearly. I also excluded the patients who had no neurological conditions that might affect the CSF pressure, and also patients who were supposed on OCP or other medications that might cause IIH. And also ambulatory patients were excluded. So all the patients, I noted the detailed history along with their age, BMI, blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, and pulse pressure. Ophthalmological examination was done in the anterior segment, gonioscopy, fundus examination, along with the pachymetry and IOP with Goldman's applanation tonometry was done for each eye, and the cases were defined as primary open angle or angle closure based on eyes geo classification. The CSF pressure and TLCPD was calculated based on a formula given by Z et al., which was determined by the body mass index, diastolic blood pressure, the age, and the TLCPD is nothing but the difference between the intraocular pressure and CSF pressure. And the ocular pressure, perfusion pressure was calculated based on 2/3 of the diastolic blood pressure plus 1/3 of pulse pressure minus the intraocular pressure. In all the statistical tools, the probability value was taken as significant if it was less than, P was less than 0.05. Coming to the results, 52 patients were females and 42 patients were male. 86 eyes had open angle, whereas 8 eyes had angle closure glaucoma, and the mean age of our participants was 54.3 years. Coming to the entire population, we saw the mean TLCPD was around 5.42. For the glaucoma patients, it was slightly higher at 8.15. The mean CSF pressure for the entire population was around 11. And in the glaucoma group, it was slightly lesser at 11.43. The mean ocular perfusion pressure in the entire population was 46.4 and was slightly lower in the glaucoma patients of 45. When we compare the glaucoma group with the non-glaucoma group, we saw the intraocular pressure, TLCPD, diastolic blood pressure, and pulse pressure was significantly higher in the glaucoma group, whereas BMI, CSF pressure, and ocular perfusion pressure had no statistical difference. So this is the table where we can see that these parameters were significantly higher and statistically significant in the glaucoma group. So I've drawn the comparison here. And then when we compared the angle closure and the open angle group, we saw the IOP was higher compared to the angle closure. CSF was higher in the open angle group. TLCPD was lower in the open angle group, but none of these was statistically significant between open angle and angle closure groups. As we can see, there was no statistical significance between any of the parameters. Coming to the discussion, translaminar cribrosa pressure difference is nothing but the difference between the intraocular pressure and CSF pressure, which IOP is taken as the transcorneal pressure of the intraocular and external atmosphere. The lamina cribrosa is presumed to be the site for glaucomatous optic neuropathy because of the intraocular compartment and retrolaminar compartment because of the CSF pressure. In our study, we saw the study population was 54.3, which is similar to the other studies done by Central India Eye Study and Beijing Eye Study. Berdal et al. Found that the lumbar CSF pressure was significantly low in glaucoma patients compared to the control group, which is again similar to our study. But that difference was not statistically significant. The mean intraocular pressure in our glaucoma group was also higher, which is again similar to the Beijing Eye Study. The translaminar cribrosa pressure difference was also significantly higher in our glaucomatous patients compared to the controls, which is again similar to the Beijing Eye Study. So we are inferring that both TLCPD along with intraocular pressure plays a role in the pathophysiology of glaucomatous optic neuropathy in all glaucoma cases. In our study, we saw the ocular perfusion pressure was lower in glaucoma than the non-glaucoma group, but was not statistically significant, which is similar to the Beijing Eye Study and low pressure glaucoma treatment study. But in their case, it was statistically significant. Again, comparing the subgroups of open angle and angle closure, we saw that the IOP, TLCPD, and ocular perfusion pressure were lower, whereas the CSF pressure was higher in open angle, but it was not statistically significant. limitations of my study was we had a smaller sample size, and also we could not check the diurnal variation because of
Please,
the
please sum up. Your time is up, please.
Okay, sir. So this is only the conclusion. Because of the diurnal variation, I couldn't measure the IOP, which will also affect the CSF pressure and TLCPT at the different timing. To conclude, glaucoma is the silent thief of vision. So thus, diastolic blood pressure, pulse pressure, IOP, and transcranial fibrosing pressure can be measured to determine patients at risk of developing glaucoma and advise them for an early glaucoma screening. Thank you, sir. These are my references.
Thank you. Thank you. Please unshare your screen. Any questions from the judges? And in between, may I ask Dr. Hiranmoy Das, is the person available, present?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Before you start, any questions from the judges?
Yes, Dr. Marathe, can I ask?
Yes, sir, of course.
Yeah, that was a nice observation. I just wanted to ask you what your study results. Can you give some take-home message? See, we are always harping on IOP.
Yes, sir.
You are bringing into picture the laminar cribrosa pressure. So the blood pressure and pulse pressure, diastolic pressure, BMI, everything has to be taken into account. So what is the message?
Sir, I want to say, yes, sir.
In a glaucoma patient.
Yes, sir. So basically, I'm saying at the community level, when we do not have the visual fields and everything accessible, so when we are going for screening, suppose at the community level, blood pressure, sphygmanometer, we can also have basic IOP, maybe Gonan's apprenation tonometer with the slit lamp. So when we are checking all these parameters, on that basis, we can tell these patients you can probably go for a further glaucoma screening for fields, because at the community, at the PHCs, when we go, it's not accessible everywhere, so for visual fields. So we can detect them at an earlier stage, because patients, mostly in the rural areas, they will not be coming for direct glaucoma because they will not understand they're having a constriction of visual fields. So I believe that at a community level, apart from just looking at IOP, we can see these other parameters as well, and advise them further to go for screening.
Oh, I wanted to know whether you can ask them to reduce BMI, reduce BP or something like that.
Yes, sir. Yes, so preventive measures can be given because it is significantly having a role retrospectively.
Thank you. I think we are running short of time. The last
Thank you,
presenter
sir.
is still here. Dr. Hiranmoy. Yeah, please share your screen. And this is the last presenter. I'm sorry for the next session, judges and presenters and speakers. It will just take 5 to 6 minutes now. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
I do. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes, audible and visible also. Yeah.
Myself, Dr. Hiranmoy Das, D16233.
Yes, please continue.
Yeah, I have no financial interest. Okay, the aim of this presentation is to introduce a unique immunization card specially made for early diagnosis of retinoblastoma. As we all know that the cases of retinoblastoma are not equally distributed around the world, and more than 90% cases of retinoblastoma live in low and middle income countries. And in India, due to late presentation and delayed diagnosis, the chance of survival of retinoblastoma is low, with more than 50% mortality rate. Therefore, to facilitate diagnosis, to decrease the disease and treatment burden, and to increase the survival rate, an attempt was made for early recognition of retinoblastoma during standard health immunization program. The method, a unique immunization card, is followed in a tertiary healthcare center, that is Nazarat Hospital, Shillong, Meghalaya, where eye examination for two things: one, the alignment of the eyeballs, and second, the pupillary reflex is made mandatory in each visit of a child for routine immunization. So this was the immunization card of our hospital. We can see that from birth to 5 years, a child is coming to this hospital at least 14 times for vaccination. So what we have done, we put an extra column to this chart for eye examination. And at birth or at 6 weeks, when the child is coming for vaccination to this hospital for the first time, the person giving vaccine to the child will examine the eyes of the child. He will if the eyeballs are well aligned, and number 2, if the pupillary reflex is black, then he will put tick sign like this. And if the eyes are not aligned, and if there is any abnormal pupillary reflex, he will put cross sign and refer the child to ophthalmology department. The same things to be done at the end of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 1 year. Again, in the same second year, at 15 months, 18 months, and at 2 years. If we see that from 4 to 6 years, the child is getting 5 vaccines. Nowhere 5 vaccines are given on the same day. So here, during this time period, we made 2 eye examination. So this immunization card is now practiced in our hospital. The lack of knowledge by the first contact physician has been shown to be a significant barrier while in detection of retinoblastoma, thus highlighting the importance of targeting primary healthcare provider. The level of awareness of the first contact healthcare provider in identifying the problem and making appropriate referral is critical in the management of retinoblastoma. And we have to identify the primary healthcare provider, the pediatrician or the ophthalmologist or any healthcare worker. And we have to educate them for early detection of retinoblastoma and ensure that they know where to refer a child for immediate diagnosis and quality treatment. So in conclusion, early detection is the key in the management of retinoblastoma. Every child is brought to the healthcare system at least 5 times before the age of 2 years for routine immunization. So we should not miss this golden opportunity for early detection of retinoblastoma. And as a responsible national society, we should try to incorporate eye examination in national immunization program for better benefit of the society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You can unshare your screen. Any questions from the judges?
Just one observation, sir. In up till the age of 4 years, I think one visit, because you are in the hospital, one visit to the eye department, because amblyopia is also a problem.
Yes, I agree.
Retinoblastoma. Please include that in your card.
If it is included.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
I think
Very nice study.
if there are no questions, I would like to ask few of the judges for their comments because we are coming to the end of the session. Any comment from the judges?
So I think this was one of the best, excellent presentations and excellent ideas, new ideas to look for retinoblastomas.
Overall comment by the judges for this particular session.
All the speakers, all the presenters, they have made excellent presentations, and except 1 or 2 where there was interruption because of the net problems. Otherwise, all these speakers, they have made excellent presentations.
So good morning all again. This was the opening batsman session of All India Ophthalmological Society in the Palicaris Hall. We are very happy and thankful to the organizers for giving us the opportunity. Myself as Dr. Prakash Marathi as moderator and chairpersons and judges who were with me, they have done the fantastic job. All the presenters were very nice in spite of some hiccups in the connectivity issue. I think it was a good start for the conference. And I'm thankful to all the presenters. Mass does not mean anything in your life. This is just the process to move forward. Don't get upset if you are not selected, and don't get very happy even if you get top numbers. I think with these words, I'm very sorry for the next session chairpersons and presenters that we are just exceeding the time because of few net connectivity issues. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.